Pinner is a suburb in northwest London. Up until the end of the 19th century, this bit here was about all there was to see. But in the 1860s, events in the City of London were causing a stir that would change Pinner forever. In 1863, a new railway opened from Paddington, in what was then the suburbs of West London, to Farringdon, in the City of London. This was the Metropolitan Railway, and it made a lot of people very excited for reasons that might perhaps best be summed up as cha-ching. You see, the Metropolitan Railway did something that, up until that point, no other railway had done. It ran underground, right through London, rather than terminating at the edges of the centre. What a lot of speculators realised was that if you could connect to this Metropolitan Railway, you could have the perfect commuter line. The Metropolitan was the prettiest girl at the dance, and there was no shortage of potential suitors. First, you had the Metropolitan and St John's Wood Railway, who wanted to build a line from Baker Street to Swiss Cottage, if Milady Metropolitan would care to join them. The Metropolitan Railway blushed and took their hand. Sorry, I think I'm getting lost in my metaphor here. The line to Swiss Cottage opened in 1869, but that wasn't enough. They started heading out towards Harrow, eventually arriving there in 1880. But even that wasn't far enough for some, and in 1874 another new railway was formed, the Harrow and Rickmansworth. As with the Metropolitan and St John's Wood Railway, this was theoretically a separate company, but to all intents and purposes it was a division of the Metropolitan Railway. You don't really need to know any of this, but I've had to consult 10 different books to write this script, and I want you to know how hard it was. The driving force behind this was a man named Edward Watkin. Watkin had become chairman of the Metropolitan Railway in 1872. The Met had run into financial difficulty due to the tendency of Victorian railway builders to also be unbelievably dodgy. Watkin was not dodgy, but he was very ambitious, and he pushed for the Metropolitan to go further and further north, regardless of whether the demand for it existed. This will become important in the not-too-distant future. In 1885 the railway got to Pinner, and for the next couple of years that was as far as it went. The architecture is very much that of a country station, not a big city metro. Which is ironic because, as I'm fond of pointing out, the word metro ultimately comes from Metropolitan Railway. These days there are 4 tracks, but back in the 1880s there were only 2. In 1887 the line extended to Rickmansworth and Pinner became a through station. It quickly became apparent that the Metropolitan had somewhat overextended itself. Watkin's ambition had been to connect with the railways of the Midlands, which was all very well, but it meant that the Metropolitan Railway ran for many miles through some rather sparsely populated districts. Fortunately, the company had a plan. When you build a railway, you have to acquire land. Typically, you acquire more land than you need, so you're prepared for any unforeseen circumstances. The expectation was that once your track was laid and you'd got all your sheds and stations and signal boxes and little corrugated iron huts and so forth, you should sell the surplus land off. The Metropolitan did not. Instead, they divided their company up, creating a theoretically separate but not really company known as the Metropolitan Railway Surplus Lands Committee. The committee would receive the remaining land and develop it. Thus, the railway could not only make money off their leftover land, but they could create their own market, turning the villages and hamlets along the line into new suburbs. New suburbs meant commuters, and that's exactly what happened at Pinner. The place was sold on the basis that it was affordable but classy. Adverts were keen to emphasise the rural beauty of the place. They used the word charming a lot in their publicity. One local builder described it as enchanted ground. Rents on the new houses were typically around £50 to £70. As late as the 1930s, a house could be bought for less than £800. Oh, for a time machine and an estate agent who doesn't look too closely at the cash I hand over. Although the railway was theoretically separate from the Surplus Lands Committee, wink wink, it did offer cheap tickets into London to encourage people to move out there. Postcards like this one were another part of the charm offensive. Published in 1909, they emphasised the beauty of the countryside of Pinner, a beauty that the Metropolitan were working hard to destroy by covering everything in houses. Pinner was a central part of the company's publicity drive, largely due to the fact that, while new estates had sprung up, it retained its delightful old high street more or less next to the station. In 1912, a guidebook published by the company described it as a favourite resort for picnics and outings, which fortunately have not had the effect of vulgarising the neighbourhood. Its situation on the northern slope of Harrow Vale gives it a pure and invigorating air, while it is sheltered from northeasterly winds by the gentle slope above it. In 1915, a new term entered the vocabulary: Metroland. This was a publicity device invented by the railway in a series of guides to the districts served by them. It was aimed at both day trippers and house hunters and continued to be published through to 1932. In 1925 the line through Pinner was electrified up as far as Rickmansworth. By this time, though, it was becoming harder and harder to sell the area as a bucolic dreamland. The Metroland guide even admitted that a lot of the trees that had once been part of Pinner's charm had been felled and urged developers to spare as many as they can in future. In 1933, the Metropolitan Railway ceased to exist as an independent entity. It was taken over by the London Underground. While the Underground brought innovation and modernity, its management did not share the late Edward Watkins' dream of metropolitan trains to the Midlands or vast estates of houses. What interested them was running trains. The fact was that the Metropolitan Railway, now reduced to merely the Metropolitan Line, was kind of a mess as a direct result of its early expansion. There were fast trains and slow trains and branches all over the place. Inefficient was what it was. Plans were drawn up to improve things, but Pinner would have to wait. The Second World War knocked things back, and the post-war austerity period slowed things down still further. In 1962, though, they were finally able to put their plans into effect. 2 additional tracks were run past Pinner for express trains. As part of this, the northbound platform was demolished and rebuilt. Consequently, that side of the station is rather less fancy than the southbound, although they did at least try to get the brickwork to match. In 2008, the station received step-free access. I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of the current footbridge. These days, Pinner and its station are an odd mix. There's been a lot of change, and a time traveller from Victorian England, possibly chasing after me and demanding his property back, would be hard-pressed to recognise most of the land around the station. Yet there are still plenty of remnants of the old days, whether that's the gorgeous old buildings of the High Street, or the fine detail of the now listed station. It is, as the Metropolitan Railway might have put it, charming. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this charming tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your kind support. You are the exaggerated publicity to my housing estate. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.